was a tight fit. Welcome to the Devil's Film School. I am your host, the FAT Mantis, and you're watching my review of Hulu's original horror anthology, Monsterland. Let me start off by saying, happy season of the witch. That's right, this October, the FAT Mantis is going to bring you an endless stream of horror and Halloween-themed content. All October, so just prepare for that. But let's get into Hulu's show, Monsterland. Now, Monsterland is advertised as the adaptation of arguably the best horror anthology book of short stories to come out in probably a decade, and that is North American Lake Monsters by Nathan Ballingrud. It's a massive undertaking to adapt such a work, and who did they get to do this? Well, apparently it is Ladies' Night in Halloween Town because they got Mary Laws. Now, for any of you who know who Mary Laws is, she's a writer and producer on the show Succession, to name a few shows that she does. And Succession is one of my favorite shows, so I assumed this was gonna be amazing. Now, did she pull this off? Let's find out. Now, the show can be summed up by a quote, a monologue pitched by beautifully done actress Kaitlyn Dever in episode 1, when she says, I'm activating thespian Fat Mantis. When you were born, when you were a little baby, there's a million yous you could be. A doctor, a lawyer, a bank robber, happy, sad, all different kinds of versions of you. Then you start going through life and you make this choice. This one, that one, and one by one, those versions sort of go off. Like they die in a sort of way. And then finally, you end up with the yous you is. Now, it was exactly like that, except Kaitlyn Dever did it with elegance and grace, and I am on YouTube. So let's get into it. Episode 1. They are all, actually the naming standards of the episodes apparently were named after the city and state that they were in. So Port Fourchon, Louisiana, which is the adaptation of the Nathan Ballingrud short story, You Go Where It Takes You. This is gothic horror at its best, and the characters come off as almost a cliche. She's hitting all the gothic, southern gothic notes. She is a down and out, low educated, super country waitress with no options, super young mother to a child who has fits of rage. She is completely losing it and unequipped with the skills or resources to take care of a child with special needs. It is driving her up the wall. She ends up having to pull tricks here and there, and she's just on her final stride when she finally meets a man who we believe is a serial killer. However, there is more to who this gentleman is. Now, was this a successful story? Now, watching it, I would say I am willing to bet that the short story it's based off of is probably the deepest thing ever written. However, the episode, not so much. It's kind of meandering. It almost doesn't have a point. It has pointless flashbacks to tell us things we already know. It's almost trying to waste 50 minutes of our time. And ultimately, the supernatural aspects of her meeting this serial killer has nothing to do with the conclusion of the episode. It's kind of like something that just happens. It's like having a cup of coffee. It's something that just happens. And at the end, the final thing that this waitress, Tony, does is so utterly illogical, it just drives you nuts. It is like watching an Amazing Spider-Man movie, and then at the very end, it's a normal movie, in the last 5 minutes, Peter Parker pulls out a Desert Eagle and shoots Mary Jane in the forehead. You'd be like, what just happened? And that's basically the feeling you get at the end of this episode. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give this episode a C- despite Kaitlyn Dever's amazing performance. I actually had a hard time giving this a bad review because her performance is amazing. Next, episode 2, Eugene, Oregon, takes place with a young man who lives with his handicapped mother. His mother unfortunately has an illness. It is not known what that illness is. It looks like it could be MS or Parkinson's. I'm not actually sure what it is, but it's completely debilitating. She absolutely needs her young son, who's in his 20s, to do this. All he does, he can't hold down a job, he has no education, another character at wit's end. And finally, he sees a shadow person in his house, a shadow that seems to have a life of its own. He goes online and joins an online community where they convince him, they explain to him what this thing is, and they convince him this thing has to die at all costs. Now, the tale comes off as a poorly written, thinly veiled, cautionary tale about young men and how they can become mass shooters. It was poorly executed, it was virtue signaling all over the place, and at the end, it just, once again, it was like the last episode, except it didn't have the benefit of having Kaitlyn Dever to save the score. I'm giving it an F. Episode 3, New Orleans, Louisiana, where a mother, her young son, and her new husband, who's a doctor, a heart surgeon, and savior to children, he works in a children's hospital, are confronted with the fact that many women, including children, come forward about his sexual assaults, and her perfect life comes crashing down. She then encounters a monster that is not explained and also seems to have nothing to do with the actual story. It ends up being a metaphor for something that she has done in her life, a mistake she has made. And I understand what it's going, but this story could have been told in 15 minutes. It is a kernel of a good idea, and therefore, I'm going to have to give this a D. Episode 4, New York, New York. The only thing I can say about this episode is that I believe that it was written by a person who has never had a conversation with another living human being in their entire life. The writer's name is Wesley Strick, and honestly, he should have his writing license, if that's such a thing, stripped from him. It was not entertaining on any way, shape, or form. I'm not even going to tell you what the plot of it is. It is that bad. F. Episode 5 finally brings a smile to my face, and I'm actually going to give this a decent grade. It's called Plainsfield, Illinois, and it is an adaptation of Nathan Ballingrud's story, The Good Husband. Now they do this something interesting in it. They gender bend the husband into a wife. It becomes a lesbian couple. They're lawyers, and it travels throughout their relationship and their lives and how they are a loving major couple. Only the problem is that one of them has horrible, horrible depression. She's constantly depressed and constantly trying to take her own life. Finally, she is successful one night after 16 years of beautiful years, and she comes back to life as a zombie. She decides to take care of this zombie. It is actually a pleasant story. Now, where it loses points, at the very end, before there's any resolution, it completely cuts off, not telling us how the story actually ends. So as a result, I am going to have to give this a B. You could have, if it actually had an ending, it would have easily scored an A. I basically enjoyed it up until that startle moment at the end. Next, episode 6. Palacios, probably mispronounced that, Texas. And that is the story of a man who has health problems. He's breathing through tubes after an oil spill destroyed both the economy of his small town and his career as a fisherman. He spends his days cleaning up the animals who are affected by the oils. He's cleaning them up and seeing which ones he can save, and he happens upon a mermaid. So this was a pleasant tale. This is probably the one that most likely fits into what you would expect from a horror anthology episode. It was very doable, and I give this episode a B+. It was decent. At the end of the day, it ends up being the story of the scorpion and the toad, if you know that. I believe it's an Aesop's fable. It ends up going those things. It's slightly predictable. However, it was a good ride. Predictable isn't always bad. Episode 7, Iron Lake, Michigan. Now, I'm going to admit, I watched this episode first because this is the one with Marie Tran, and I was so curious. I'm actually a big fan of her, even though I'm a hater of Rose Tico. I like that actress. I think she is not what made Rose Tico bad. Let me go on record for saying that. But I had to see what she was bringing, and I was pleasantly surprised. She plays a character totally different than she normally does. Now, in this, she's a girl who's awkward and strange in high school, and she has a best friend, a beautiful it girl, the queen bee type character, who seems to adore her, and she doesn't know why. And one day, that friend goes missing. Years later, it turns out that Kelly Marie Tran's character has absorbed her life. She took her friends, she took her boyfriend, she's even marrying her boyfriend, and even almost has become an adopted daughter to the mom who lost a daughter. Now, the story continues as there have to be numerous flashbacks as to how that girl went missing. It was a pleasant ride. I'm going to actually give this one a B+ as well. Good work, Kelly Marie Tran. And finally, to bring it up, the final anchor episode is called Newark, New Jersey. It is the adaptation of Nathan Ballingrud's The Monsters of Heaven. I don't even know what to say. It wasn't a complete fail, but as narrative, it was all over the place. It starts with the idea that a group of angels have fallen to Earth. They're wingless angels who were kicked out of heaven for some reason, and they were brought down to Earth. And it stars, that's right, Luke Cage's own Mike Colter. And Mike Colter is doing an amazing job acting as a father who has lost his daughter. The problem is that his story almost has nothing to do with the angels in question. Later on, when he encounters the angel, it turns out that angels their angel blood has the ability of hallucinations. And at the end, instead of actually having a third act, it's an entire giant hallucination between him and his wife as they get high off of angel blood. It was nonsense. It was utter drab. It was an attempt to be pretentious, an attempt to be art house, but it was a fail ultimately at the end. One of the things that made this episode good is we get another appearance from Tony, Kaitlyn Dever, right? She's the next Meryl Streep. I love her. She appears, and she's not in a lot of the episode, but she ends up being a waitress who serves Mike Colter and gives him some powerful advice while he's there. So I love her. Ultimately, I'm going to have to give that one a C, a solid C. Not looking good for Monsterland. I would have to say that at the end of the day, I want my 8 hours back, essentially. Now, however, I would be willing to watch a season 2 if Kaitlyn Dever is allowed to be in every episode. This should just make this the Kaitlyn Dever story. And also, I noticed that I gave significantly higher grades to episodes that were directly adapted from Nathan Ballingrud's work rather than just written on their own. So ultimately, I'm going to have to say that this is a fail for Mary Laws. So that is my review of Monsterland, Hulu's original horror anthology. What did you think of it? Am I swaying you against it or for it? Do you want to check it out just to see the shock value? Please let me know in the comments. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great Halloween. Keep those scares and horror coming. And until next time, ciao for now. Ghouls and ghosts.